a very warm welcome to you all on this cold winter's night. How very lovely to be able to get together like this. We're on the third class of the 3 higher trainings for dummies. And so this is one of my passions, this kind of taking the Buddha's teachings and trying to become a bridge between us beginners and the Buddha's teachings, put it into contemporary terms. I do my very best to, not water things down, but to just share from my own experience and from what I've read, just to get started. And once you're up and running, then everything is fine. I found with just about all of Buddhist study, the beginning bit in anything is the hardest. It's like getting on your bike and doing those first few pedals. It just takes a lot of effort. So I really feel we need a lot of help with that first bit of effort. So the 3 higher trainings are about these 3 particular skills that we need for anything in life. We need for a worldly existence, to have any kind of success, to accomplish any of our goals, to be happy, to have good relationships, all of these things, we need them. But we don't just have to try and develop these and then we get to the end of our life and we die, and what was there to show for it? These 3 higher trainings are actually skills that we can transfer into the job of becoming enlightened, or at least becoming free from cyclic existence, completely free from the ups and downs of cyclic existence. And so for that, they're really essential skills. So they can become tools for genuine happiness, for emotional freedom, for complete liberation from cyclic existence, and for enlightenment, so that we can perfectly help all others. There's this huge scope for them. Now, Maria, I haven't done your homework. Neither have I. Aren't we bad? So we've got, we're on class 3, and the analogy for the 3 higher trainings, if you remember, is this picture of a person swiping at the root of I think what's a banana tree. And so this analogy is fantastic. If you remember about the analogy, so the tree, the root of the tree, it's the root of all of our ignorance. And instead of just trying to dismantle the tree leaf by leaf and then more leaves grow and then we unpick those, just cut it off at the root and it's done. Then remember, the axe is wisdom, and particular form of wisdom, the wisdom realizing emptiness, or the wisdom understanding how we exist in the world, how we're interdependent, how there is no inherent existence. And so the wisdom to free our minds completely from the control of delusions and their seeds, we need wisdom. So it also frees us from dogma, fundamentalism. We become more in step with reality. Then the 2 arms, they're like what holds our wisdom together, so that our wisdom doesn't become something, a weapon that we wield willy-nilly at others. It doesn't become a weapon like nihilism or cynicism. It doesn't become a weapon to harm others, but we have control over it. And so what controls it is our concentration. So the 2 strong arms, that's the strength of our concentration. So if we don't have single-pointed concentration, we are unable to stabilize our realizations, our wisdom. We don't remember our insights, all that work that we did to have a realization, and then we forget it. We don't remember the advice given to us right when we need it, when emergencies happen. We forget to focus on our good qualities, we get distracted. If we can develop concentration though, then we'll be able to stop panicking when things change. when the world turns upside down. We won't panic. We'll be able to know exactly what to do because we won't lose our equilibrium like that. We'll still have our concentration. We'll be able to cease all of the gross delusions, those really coarse, disturbing emotions, and most importantly, we'll remember to apply our wisdom. And so then the third one, ethics. So cultivating ethics is what creates happiness. And that's what we're going to look at today. So with the ethics, it's even if we haven't quite chopped down the tree yet, what it means is we're still putting in place the best possible inner and outer conditions for happiness, for our own happiness and for a harmonious environment. We stop creating more trouble, more difficulties. We stop digging ourselves into the hole. And so with ethics, actually, it helps us create happiness, and it helps us accomplish all of our goals. And so they hire these three trainings. They're not just ordinary ethics or ordinary concentration or ordinary wisdom. What makes them higher is the motivation, which is to become completely free of cyclic existence altogether. So as we're going through the class, that can be our motivation. We can think, of course, we have our worldly motivations. We want to be able to live through the coronavirus lockdown. We want to be able to use our time well. We want to be good people and help others. But we can't let it just stop there. That's our initial incentive. And then we've got to make it a higher motivation. Higher meaning far more broad-ranging. So at the very least, our own complete liberation from cyclic existence. Then it becomes higher ethics and higher concentration and higher wisdom. And of course, then we'll have a good life as well. So the goal of personal liberation, or, the Mahayana motivation, our own personal liberation. Why? For an even bigger reason, to be able to help others. So an altruistic motivation as well. So we need to have them in a particular order, actually. And even though we've talked about them from wisdom first, then last week concentration, this week we're talking about ethics. Ethics is actually the basis of it all. So that's the strong body, being embodied, embodying our values, the body that supports, the arms are joined to that supports our wisdom. So if we don't have a strong body, then that acts, it's way too heavy, then we tip over, we go to the extremes. We can accidentally cut ourselves, harm ourselves. So we might have some kind of insight using our logic, but if we're not concentrating properly and if we don't put it into practice, it's going to backfire. So the ethics part is about putting it into practice, embodying it. So there's this wonderful quote for the higher training in ethics from Nagarjuna. If a container is broken, how can it hold anything? If our ethics are broken, how can we develop positive qualities? So it's such a good quote, isn't it? And I've often wondered, why is ethics the first one and not, for instance, wisdom? But it's because wisdom doesn't exist in a vacuum. Wisdom exists in the minds of living beings. And why do we need ethics before we develop concentration? Because we can't actually focus on anything or concentrate on anything if we are not comfortable in our own skin. So we might be able to focus a little bit in meditation, or we might be able to focus a little bit on our career, but if we're not comfortable in our own skin, we will not be able to direct our mind how we want to. Our mind may be propelled by pride or ambition or guilt or all sorts of things, but we're not the boss of our mind. Our mind, all of those disturbing emotions would be dominating us. So if we really want to develop concentration and wisdom, we have to be able to relax, to be able to focus. And the only way we can do that is if we're comfortable with ourselves. If we don't have what I used to feel as civil war in our own mind. So how do we become comfortable in our own skin? We have to abandon all of the harmful physical and verbal actions or expression. So having an ethical approach is kind of that becomes an antidote. It goes both ways. On one way, an ethical approach means that it stops us acting badly. So it stops the negative actions. And another way, having an ethical approach means it changes our motivation, our reason for doing things. So it changes the mind as well. So for that, it's counted as an antidote to both motivation and action. And we really have to embody our ethics. If our ethics are broken, we might say we have values, but what happens is we end up with a double standard. And with that, then we can't develop any good qualities at all. If we don't have ethics, then even if we do good things, everything we do becomes tarnished. So there's countless examples about this. You know, if politicians, they help run the country, they do all interminable amounts of admin, which I wouldn't want to do, but what do we remember about them? When they have sex with their staff, or when they, sexually abuse their staff, or when they have the sports rorts. And that tarnished activity, it tarnishes everything else of the work of government. We can't even think about all that work of government. We just look at that, really tarnished activity. With the banks, no one feels warmly towards banks. Why? Well, because they were charging dead people fees, weren't they? So it tarnished the entire job of banks. Religious leaders, when religious leaders abuse their flock, abuse children, that tarnishes the entire teachings of the church, of Jesus and all of the saints. And that's really heavy, isn't it? So the actions of one person in one person's life tarnishes thousands of years of benefit and goodness, to the extent that we can't even see it. So not embodying our ethics is a really heavy thing. And even if we do manage to do some good things, even if the church does manage to feed the poor, does manage to work with reconciliation, still it's completely tarnished by that lack of ethics. That's right. And yesterday's High Court news of allegations of sexual harassment, and I was thinking also about that MP a while ago in England, when they had the coronavirus lockdown, and he just drove a couple of 100 miles to go see his family and thought he was somehow different, that he was exempt. So we're going to have a look at how come we have double standards. Where do they come from? Why don't we see how blindingly obvious those double standards are and just not do them? Because, yeah, that's right, it was the health minister. It's even worse, isn't it? So it's nothing to do with a lack of intelligence, is it? It's something else is going on there. And so I, for one, want to guard that I don't develop a double standard, because to me it seems like it must be terrifyingly easy to do. So there is this huge incentive to make sure we do not have a double standard, that we really develop our ethics and make them part of us, integrate them into our life, embody our ethics. And if we do, then the benefits are amazing. So if we have ethics, then anything we undertake is possible. You know, because we become a trustworthy person. People want to help us. They feel safe around us. It also means that anything that we study, our studies won't degenerate or become unhinged. So it won't mean that we get so intent on all of the theory that we end up arguing about emptiness. You know, I mean, there's some discussion groups, Buddhist discussion groups, where people actually argue about philosophy. They're not debating. They're not having a healthy, rigorous reason to and fro debate. No, they're just arguing and slagging each other off. So that comes because why we become unhinged like that, because our studies aren't grounded in ethics. So we just kind of, it's like a balloon. We just become untethered and float off. But if we do have ethics, then everything that we study becomes medicine to cure the afflictions. Even other things, even non-Dharma things will apply with a Dharma sensibility, and that too will become a medicine for us, a balm for the mind. A little encouragement too, that living ethically in a culture that isn't ethical, so it becomes quite difficult, it really counts double. It's very easy to act ethically when everyone else around you is being nice and abiding by all the rules and all of that. Then largely what we do is unconscious. But when we're really tested, when it's going against the stream, when it's difficult to live ethically, when it's harder to put into practice, that really counts. That amount of effort really counts. Oh yeah, branch stacking in the ALP. So that, you know, the Labor Party that seems to become completely divorced from its roots of actually helping the working person. It's so incredibly sad, and there's been so many amazing Labor Party people that have put in so much effort into helping others, and then you hear about branch stacking and it tarnishes the entire Labor movement, not just now, but all the way back in time. Yeah. Yes, particularly nasty and personal. So, oops, here we go, right. So let's have a look what ethical conduct is then. So what it means, number one, restraining from harm. Refraining from harm, which is a little difficult to recognize because sometimes it means doing nothing. So not retaliating. So it's not necessarily really obvious that we are being ethical. It is a quality of mind that wishes to abstain from non-virtue or negativity. So it's primarily what's happening in the mind and intention. And in Australian parlance, you'd say, keeping yourself nice. Keep yourself nice. So we try and abandon harmful physical and verbal actions. So non-harm, the practice of non-harm, which took me ages to get my head around that. And of course, then if you can then help on top of that, great. But the main one is to refrain from harm first. And many people, like for instance in the Labor Party, you know, they're generous or they help others, but they're also really angry and abuse everybody. And that's just doesn't work, does it? Then the motivation for having values or an ethical system in one's own mind has to come from within. It might start from outside, from say fear of being caught by your parents, fear of punishment. While we're learning, when we're little kiddies, it comes from outside. So our parents might say, don't do this or don't do that, and whatever reasons they give, it's just over the top of your head. But just the fear of getting in trouble, that's enough to keep you being good. And then after a while, you might start getting a bit smart and figure out how to not get in trouble. And this is where most people leave their ethics at, that we're good as long as we're in fear of the law. But we'll try and get away with whatever we can. So, you know, we'll try and cheat on our taxes as much as possible. We'll try and cheat on public transport and, you know, get away with a $2 fare and not beeping on or off as much as possible. So it's a discipline that comes from outside of us. And that means that if that discipline falls apart, we also lose our ethics. And that discipline can fall apart when the external forces are no longer there, or when our own internal kind of suppression isn't working. For instance, when we're under the effects of anesthetic, when we're a bit delirious with the flu, when we're kind of in extremes. Then also our external forces that keep us in check fall away. Also, the other external ones, why we might be ethical, is for our reputation. So we don't want to look bad. We don't want to be thought of badly by our friends. Or we want to have a good reputation, be thought of well by our mentors, our teachers, our peers. So we act all pious or good, sit up straight in meditation and act all kind when people are watching us. But when they're not watching, then we don't. So there's one of those things, you know, in shopping centres, even though they've got the cash registers at the back of the store, I've always wondered why. Because they're so easy to steal things on the way. But of course, they get you to go into the store. But what they've always got at the front of the store is the mannequins. And subliminally, what's happening neurologically is we feel we're being watched. And if we feel we're being watched, we don't steal things. So there's this real understanding of what keeps us good is the pressure from outside. Other pressure from outside or might be things like bargaining with karma or bargaining with God. If I do this, you know, if I'm very, very good, then, you know, please help me. Or just through fear, or because we think we should. We've got some idea of I should do this or I shouldn't do that, and without necessarily knowing exactly what it means. But really, our motivation shouldn't be through fear or guilt, but from this understanding of how it works and a determination to become free from cyclic existence and understanding how our mind works. So it's a natural conclusion that we come to. So I really learnt this the hard way. So I'll tell you a story. It makes me quite emotional whenever I talk about it because, you know, this thing of the ethics coming from outside of us. So I grew up a Buddhist, and when I first started kind of studying Buddhism, and I was quite a bit of, not a rat bag, but quite extreme. Not quite radical, I would say. I'm quite conservative, but quite extreme in things. And so when I finally went to whatever teaching about being ethical and virtuous conduct and things, I kind of just made an assumption. Oh, right, okay, so I better clean up my act and try and be good for once, and I'll give it a go. And so I had that kind of idea of what I should and what I shouldn't do. So this was like 30 years ago, and I was a bit of a sleep around and a bit of a flirt. And so I thought, oh, okay, so maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I shouldn't sleep around all the time. You know, maybe that's a wrong thing to do. And so for one, I hadn't quite figured out what sexual misconduct actually was. Anyway, so the night that I decided, okay, I'm going to stop being a sleep around now, these friends of mine had set up this fellow to come over and chat me up. And so it was the first time that I said, no, I won't go home with you, because I had this new idea, oh, this is how I should act. And so unbeknownst to me, he'd been going through a really terrible time. And they'd all said, oh, look, you know, go hook up with Miffi. She's a real goer. She won't say no. And then I did. And so that night he went home and he killed himself. So, I mean, of course I wasn't the cause of that, but I was definitely a condition to it. And it just, like, it still devastates me to this day. But the teaching that I got from this was, you can't just take on an ethical system or a set of rules without understanding where they come from. You've got to actually integrate them into your life and not just do it because someone else says should or shouldn't. So the Buddha never said don't sleep around. He said don't cheat on your partner. Don't cheat on people. He didn't say anything about don't be a prostitute either. So what he was saying was to refrain from sexual misconduct, from harming others, and to restrain your mind and your activity. So yeah, if you're driven by attachment, that's going to have a big effect. But then when we go along and we impose these rules, don't be a sleep around, or this is how many people you should sleep with in your life and any more is no good, that's some external arbitrary rule. And for me, it was not appropriate. So from that day on, I just vowed I am never taking anything on just as a rule and just because other people say or other people frown at my behaviour. I'm going to know exactly what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and be able to back it up. And so then I went back to being completely outrageous and out there, and actually, you know, it worked for a while. So then soon after that, there was this other fellow that I slept with and took home, and only just like one night stand or something. And about 3 months later, I saw him in the pub, and he said, "Oh, Miffi, you know, thanks very much. You just broke the drought. You know, I'd been alone for like 3 years and I was feeling really, really bad. And then it broke the drought. And now here, let me introduce you to my girlfriend." And he was, so that kind of, I mean, I'll never make up for what happened. But, you know, you've got to find your own way. It's not about what comes from outside. The ethics is really embodying your understanding of interdependence and the welfare of others. So we just do the best that we can and try and be content in our heart and have courage, and then it's sustainable for the long term. And you won't get into trouble. You won't get mixed up as to what's right and what's wrong. So this kind of takes us to the next part, which is that when we're looking at karma, cause and effect, it's universal. It's like a universal law, an explanation of how cause and effects work. But ethics is what's called situational. Ethics depends on the circumstances. And in different circumstances, different actions are necessary, just like I found out. What happens is we think ethics are inherent, that the goodness lies in the law, lies in the rule, that it's inherently good or inherently bad, and there's no two ways about it. But it always depends on the situation and it changes. So there is no inherence. When the circumstances change, how we respond has to change. So a really simple one is, you know, you might say, oh, harsh speech, you know, yelling at somebody is wrong or bad. But sometimes, what if they can't hear you? You have to yell. Or what if they're so deluded or panicking that you go, hey, and it shocks them and they stop. So you can't say, do not yell ever, because it's a situational thing. And this is where it gets quite tricky when we're trying to develop laws of the land, because you cannot legislate for morals. You can only legislate for behaviour, but you can't legislate for ethics or for morals or for your motivation. So the laws will never be perfect. There is no inherence in them, because the goodness doesn't reside in the actual law, or the badness doesn't reside in the actual law. So what we end up with, if we want to have a harmonious and functioning society, a lot of our laws are counterintuitive for them to work. So really obvious example that we're pretty all familiar with is, remember the era, when we've probably seen in the movies, the era of prohibition. So, you know, it was decided that alcohol was bad, and Buddhism says also refrain from alcohol because it causes recklessness. But if you legislate against alcohol, so make it illegal. What happened in Prohibition? We all know, don't we? Alcohol use went through the roof, and so did corruption. And there was no way to control it anymore. So the people that legislated and made alcohol illegal wanted to minimise alcohol use, and the result was more alcohol use, not less. Why that happened was they thought that the goodness resided in the actual law, that you could legislate for that instead of legislating for the behaviour. So, for instance, then with, say, safe injecting rooms. So why no one would ever vote for safe injecting rooms is because you feel, that's right, Sandra, you wrote it down exactly the same time I was saying it. You feel like there is the inherence in the law that if you vote for a safe injecting room, you're condoning being a junkie, heroin use. But actually, it's the opposite. If you have safe injecting rooms, then it's harm minimisation. Then you can control it. Then you can keep people safe. Then you can help them get off it. But why it's never popular is because on first glance, it looks like you're condoning it, because we have this view of inherence. So this is why wisdom has to inform our ethics, because we cannot grasp that view of inherence. It doesn't work. And the same thing with abortion. So from a Buddhist point of view, you know, abortion is taking a human life that could potentially be a precious human life, a perfect human life. But if you want to minimize abortion, you have to actually make abortions freely available and safe. It's just like with prohibition, isn't it? Because if we don't, then we end up harming more mothers and more babies. So as a Buddhist, I'd have to vote for abortion being legal. So we've got to be able to see how there's a difference between what we're legislating for and our internal ethics. And the only way that we can do that and navigate our way through is if we've got that wisdom of that there is no inherence, that ethics is situational. We can only legislate for behaviour, and we've got to be really clear about that, and we end up with all of these counterintuitive laws. So it's a bit of a minefield, isn't it? So how do we get started? Personally, how do we integrate this into our life? Well, whatever vows that we have, we try and keep them, keep them well. So if we have marriage vows, we try and stick to our marriage vows. And many people write their own marriage vows these days as well, don't they? Include those things that really matter to them. As you're growing up, some people are in Scouts. I'm not sure what the Scouts vows were, but there seems to be some code of conduct. And we had a couple of Scouts coming and a Scoutmaster coming to class, and they really dug the Buddhist teachings, like it was just a natural development for them. If you come to Australia and you're lucky enough to become an Australian citizen, then you have your citizenship vows. Many of us who are born in Australia, we just naturally have citizenship. Then we might flout them a bit. We may not even go out and vote or anything like that. We don't really recognise, wow, we have citizenship vows. So with all of these external vows, when we first take them, we've got to be aware of them at the beginning and learn them. And then they become second nature. And that's the whole point of it. A professional code of conduct. So social workers and psychologists and teachers, you know, for instance, they have that professional code of conduct. You can't have an affair with someone in your class. And different disciplines have a different amount of time. Sometimes it's a few months. Sometimes it's a few years. So if you had a student, you can't have an affair with them for 2 years afterwards. Or if you're in psychoanalysis with someone, it's for more years than that. It's like 3 or 4 years afterwards. So that professional code of conduct recognises that there is a power discrepancy and we have to protect the vulnerable. What else about the professional code of conduct? That's right. So, treating with the law, the code of conduct is to treat everyone equally. No one is above the law. That's what people try and uphold, and the majority do try and uphold. Teachers try and teach all of the students, regardless of whether they like them or not. And wow, our health professionals during the coronavirus crisis, that's that real putting it into practice, isn't it? Of caring for others, regardless of whether they're friend, enemy, or stranger. Abiding by the laws of the land. So in particular, once you become a Buddhist, and like if you're a high profile Buddhist, like I'm a high profile Buddhist in Camp Hill, so I have to be really, really good because everybody on the bus route and at the supermarket knows that I'm from the Buddhist Centre. So to keep the good name of Lungri Tumpa Centre, I have to be very, very good. And I have some friends who, when they became Buddhist, they were bemoaning, they were quite poor. And they're thinking, oh, look, if I wasn't a Buddhist, I could just grow dope and make a whole lot of money and life would be easy. But now I can't do anything. Now I'm unemployed and poor, and all the avenues that I used to have open to me to make ends meet are no longer there. I can't do them anymore. So now life gets much more difficult. I do not know how anyone survives on the dole. I just cannot see how it's possible without resorting to a life of crime. But once you become a Buddhist, then things can actually become more difficult like this. Then also, Rinpoche is often talked about becoming an inner professional. So how we have these professional codes of conduct to bring them inwards, to have it as part of our practice, our emotional practice. And we can do it because we expect our doctors and nurses and teachers and everyone to have a professional code of conduct. Then we can also incorporate that into how we treat others on a very deep level. So it becomes instinctual. It's not just something learnt, but we integrate it. So a few classes ago, one of the ladies there told me that counsellors are taught this attitude called assumed positive regard. And this really always stuck with me because when people come to counselling, their whole life may be in disarray. They may be acting really badly, but as a counsellor, you have an assumed positive regard. So in my terms, I think of that as they're on your side, regardless of whether you're stuffing up. They're there to help you. They're on your side. They're your advocate. So you feel safe with them. So it's this, they talk to the best parts in you, not to all of the bits that are stuffing up. And this assumed positive regard we can have towards everybody. So we acknowledge the bad behaviour, but we see beyond it to the human being who's suffering. I'm not sure if I told you this story in this class or another class about in the deep south of America, and in the time when the Ku Klux Klan was very overt, and they're about 40,000 members, and they would meet wearing their very intimidating white outfits and the hoods, and at one stage there was, we couldn't say it was a riot, but it was a lynching, and there were some black people that stood up for themselves, and a few people were hurt on either side. There was actually a lynching as well, but various people were taken to hospital in an ambulance. And all of the nurses, the attending in the hospital, in the emergency department, were black. And here comes this person being wheeled in on the trolley in a Ku Klux Klan outfit with the hood and everything, with blood coming from wherever, and they just took off the outfit and saved this guy's life. Now that is assumed positive regard, isn't it? And that is being a real inner professional, because that's not thinking, oh, what should I do here? That is just deeply, instinctually knowing this is a human being and we are all the same under the skin. And when we're bleeding and when we hurt, we all suffer. So that's not an intellectual thing anymore. When you're going to save someone like that, that just blows my mind. And then, of course, you know, that had incredible repercussions, because this guy, Ku Klux Klan, wakes up and his life has been saved by the black nurses. So his whole idea of black people changed completely just from that act of, you know, incredible kindness and being an inner professional. So we can have that kind of care towards people even if we don't like them, regardless of the behavior, because we see much deeper to those universal kind of experiences. All right, so before we go on to a little bit more on a practical step-by-step what to do, what other kind of comments or questions do you have? Is it making sense so far? I mean, it's pretty full on, isn't it, ethics? It's all, you know, we all go around saying, oh, I have these values and those values, but actually when we have to put them into practice, it's heavy duty. So anything to add or any questions? We all bleed. Yeah, that's right, Bron, we do. And it's very difficult to remember that when we're just focusing on the surface or the behavior and think the person is the behavior. Yeah. So let's have a look at a 10-point checklist. Where do we get started? What to do and what to avoid. So you might naturally know about these things, but I can tell you none of this came naturally to me. And I've always had to work things out myself. And whenever I've just taken something on, you know, as rote learning, it hasn't worked out well. I've really got to nut it out for myself, and I need a bit of help. So one of the things that I found really useful was being able to tell the difference between a rule, an arbitrary rule, and something that's naturally bad or naturally harmful. So for instance, promiscuity, is it naturally bad or a rule? Of course there is a list, that's right. So before we get to the list, let's have a look at how to tell the difference between these two things. So what we have is natural misdeeds and proscribed misdeeds. So natural misdeeds universally recognize actions that cause harm or suffering. So this is something, it's nothing to do with belief, it's nothing to do with a situation. It's like that thing of we all bleed. No one likes to bleed. No one likes to be, you know, violence perpetrated on them. No one likes their stuff stolen. No one likes being cheated on or lied to or betrayed. This isn't anything that we decide. It's nothing to do with belief. And the proof for that for me is that it's animals too. So animals don't have beliefs, but they don't like their dinner being stolen by somebody else. If you've got two cats and one cat steals the other's dinner, they're not happy about it. Animals don't like to be beaten. You know, so those kind of things, it's nothing to do with belief. They're universal experiences. They're counted as natural misdeeds. And then there are proscribed misdeeds. So not inherently bad one way or another, but they can lead to more destructive behavior. So for instance, alcohol or drugs, it's not inherently good or bad. But for most people, alcohol leads to reckless behaviour. But not always. So there are some cultures where actually alcohol use is completely different from how we have binge drinking in Australia. Alcohol use is only like in a group, and it's like a social bonding, and everybody becomes a happy drunk. But no one drinks by themselves in secret out of guilt, or drinks to become belligerent. So we in our culture think that belligerence and violence are a natural result of alcohol. They're not. They're a natural result of pent-up anger, and the alcohol just makes it come out. So prescribed misdeeds, things like that, but also cultural gaffes, like you know, in the Middle East, if you throw a shoe at somebody, it's counted as a real insult. So it's kind of not that much of an insult here, but terrible insult. Or hugging a monk or a nun. So that's a proscribed misdeed. We're not supposed to do that. It's an inappropriate thing to do. Some people know not to do it. Other people just are real huggy people and are completely oblivious. But, you know, they have vows against physical conduct to keep themselves very subdued. And what else? So then proscribed misdeeds, often we may have to work to change the law. So up until very recently, it was illegal to have same-sex marriage. Up until, was it the 90s? It was illegal to have homosexual acts in Tasmania. You could go to prison in the 1990s. I mean, so these kind of things, that's a proscribed misdeed and something to be worked to change the law, to make it fair. Other proscribed misdeeds, speeding, how fast you're allowed to drive. There's one. So it's not inherently good or bad, but it helps keep people safe. And if people know how fast you're allowed to drive here or there, and according to the circumstances, it helps keep society safe. So they're not entirely to be disregarded, are they? They're helpful. And so then on the other hand too, with those, the prescribed misdeeds and the natural ones, on positive things as well, there are naturally positive things that we can do. So kindness, that's a universally recognised, no matter what language we speak, universally recognised. And being gentle, sharing things, universally recognised as a positive action. Saving lives, universally recognised as a positive action. And there are kind of naturally meaningful activities like donating money or sharing meals or educating children. But there are other things that it depends on our motivation, whether they become helpful or not. So say just driving a taxi for a living, it's not inherently good or bad. So what makes it a positive or negative action, what can make it really beneficial is having a really good motivation. So if we can't kind of save the world from coronavirus, we can still make our life meaningful by changing our motivation, make it a good motivation. And then the actions that we do, if they're those relatively neutral things, then they can become positive actions. So I wanted to ask everyone, before we go on to the 10-point checklist, thinking about like the last week, that what are some of the naturally virtuous things that you've done? That nothing to do with belief, but that you recognise as being a naturally positive action or a naturally kind action or a naturally good action that you've done in the last week. So write them in the chat. Buddhist point of view would say, what naturally virtuous things did you do this week? Hopefully in a week we've done one naturally virtuous thing. Yes, thank you, Bron. Maintaining social distance, the ultimate in non-harm. So it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because it's not concrete. It's an anti thing, isn't it? And yet it is so important. Yes. Stopping to see if someone needs help. Yep. Reconnecting with the family. Yes. So there's probably patience in there and generosity. Putting insects outside, also saving lives, patience, careful, gentleness. Sharing anything. I shared the last Tim Tam with Eddie. I know it's not much, but sometimes it's the whole world. What else? Anything else? What other things do we do? Naturally virtuous. So I'd say it's not because you're not doing anything virtuous, but you're not bringing attention to it. Concentration or awareness. Yeah, supporting friends. Yep. Supporting family, those we're intimately, karmically connected with. Yes. Looking after grandkids. Yes. So hopefully educating and showing kindness and joy, the whole package. Yeah. So there's the natural misdeeds, but there's also those naturally positive, joyous activities to do. With ethics, the first step though is to avoid the 10 non-virtuous actions. So that's like avoiding the double standard. And then when we have that space, we've created that space, we feel comfortable in our own skin, then we can start developing the positive side of those things. But if we just go straight to the positive side of things without refraining from these negative actions, it's going to backfire. So if anyone's ever had a really generous friend that's also really short-tempered, what do you remember about them? And it's a real double-edged sword, isn't it? So someone might be quite generous, but if you don't feel safe with them, in the end, we just don't even want that generosity, do we? So the first step is to refrain from the negative, harm minimization, to not mirror back all of the negativities of the world. And then after that, then engage in the positive things. And those, whatever positive things you engage in, then that's according to your situation, abilities. So the checklist, the three main physical things to avoid killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. So avoiding killing in our culture in Australia is very easy. There's hardly any guns. It's not like every household has a couple of guns in it. So the means for harming others are not as prevalent. And also we don't have conscription into the army. We barely have a gang culture. There's a whole lot of alternatives. And now finally, there is a little bit of inroads into, bullying and domestic violence. But at least there's lip service that this is not a good thing. So with killing, in our culture, it's relatively easy to stay away from. But like if I was in Sierra Leone, for instance, or if there's all the pirates and whatever and incredible poverty, then the killing would be far more difficult to abstain from. Stealing, no one likes their stuff being stolen. And sexual misconduct, well, it's worth figuring out what that actually means, isn't it? So all of this is to do with their natural misdeeds. They're universally recognised as harming others. because they harm us and they harm others. So they're the main ones to refrain from. To do with the speech, how we communicate with others, the main things to refrain from: lying, harsh speech or aggressive speech, yelling or swearing at people, it kind of makes people even physically recoil. Slander or divisive speech, talking behind people's back. And then gossip, kind of meaningless chatter, shooting the breeze, who knows what, that just kind of trickles along. And because it trickles along without awareness, without mindfulness, or without our concentration, then there's no wisdom, and then it just ends up degenerating. So those ones are the main four to avoid. We can fairly well recognize when we're doing them. And then to do with the mind, to avoid maliciousness or malice, or thoughts of revenge. To avoid being covetousness, that kind of craving and plotting, just wanting what other people have. And to avoid distorted views, prejudice, bias, fundamentalist views, and all the way to those views of inherence, of grasping at things to be inherently right or wrong, true or untrue. So that the activities of the mind are slightly different. So ethics are slightly difficult compared to the other two. Ethics is based on our expression, our physical expression and our verbal expression with others. And that we can definitely do something about right now. And then it means that it contains those internal activities of the mind, those three worst ones of the mind. It helps contain them. So if we can actually embody our ethics, so we might start off with this checklist, and we try and stick to the checklist, and then we try and incorporate it with wisdom, so we understand why. So we understand, oh yeah, no, just like me, no one likes being yelled at. So then when push comes to shove and we might be yelled at, we don't yell back. And we understand why, because it's just going to make the situation worse. So this is, if we can integrate this, what happens is it guards against that double standard. Because if we just have it as a set of rules that we don't integrate into our life, then what happens is someone yells at us and we go, well, I'm a good person, but if someone yells at me, I'm going to yell back. Or, when I yell back, that's different. So these double standards come in really easily if we're not abiding by our ethics ourselves and we're just looking at everybody else's behaviour. So I've found, for instance, it's the most difficult to respect others when they are not respecting you, and yet that's the time when we have to do it. And it's the hardest time to do it. Okay, so... Yeah, that's right. Barnaby Joyce, anti-gay marriage, but having an affair. Yeah, so again, there's two things happening there, because one of them is the inherence, that thinking that marriage, the vows, the marriage itself is inherently good. And so therefore marriage between a man and a woman is inherently good, and therefore anything else is inherently bad. Whereas if we look at it from a situational point of view and think, well, what's the spirit of marriage? A harmonious relationship. So if we look at it that way, then there's a whole lot of people that are married that are toxic relationships and they should just leave each other. And, before there was marriage equality, real, proper, true to the spirit of the thing, marriages just between same-sex people. So, yeah, there's this problem that comes from, the double standard comes from thinking inherence, The thinking that if I'm married, then everything's sweet, everything's fine. I don't have to worry about how I act, for instance. And then having the affair, the double standard, thinking, oh, well, that's different for me. I don't quite know how you could justify it, but it happens really easily. So I saw this just at a really tiny level sneaking in with me, where when I was studying up at Chenrezig Institute years ago now, and so we were all supposed to be there on time, and the tutor was often late. And I thought, there's a double standard there of thinking, oh, because I'm the tutor, I can be late. And so then when I started leading classes here, and then I realized, oh, okay, so that's why you're late, because on the way to class, everybody stops you and needs to talk, and they have a problem, and you've got to set this up and set that up. And so there's all of these constrictions on your time, and then you get to class and you're late, and then you go, okay, I expect everybody else to be on time, but I can be late. It's still a double standard though, isn't it? It's not fair. But it's so easy to sneak in to think that somehow we're the exception. So, I mean, the answer to that is start going to class earlier. Start coming to class half an hour earlier so that all those things can happen, so that then you can give everybody the respect of they've made the effort, so I'm going to make the effort. So having that kind of respect for others is what guards against the double standard. Yeah, there's a double standard too, that men can sleep around and women can't. Well, that's the one that I was kind of, got caught by, of somehow, being a promiscuous woman was a bad thing. But it's not inherently a bad thing. It all depends on your motivation. It all depends if you're helping someone else break their vows or not. But yeah, in our culture, there is an inequality there. Now, I wanted to read you something else. So when we have a whole lot of delusions in our mind, this is from Yangtze Rinpoche, Practicing the Path. So this section here on the 3 higher trainings is where I've got a lot of the information from these classes, and it's really fantastic stuff. So he says, as beginners, we've not yet developed the antidote of wisdom, the wisdom realizing emptiness, which could cut through all of our delusions and liberate us entirely from suffering. However, the training of living in pure ethics is a practice that we should be able to manage right now, today. It's not beyond our reach. Many people in the Western world these days are afflicted with a mental sickness called depression. Depression happens when the mind is overcome by a very strong sense of craving for a certain object, for a certain person, for a certain experience. As this craving grows and its wishes are not actualized, aggression arises in the mind. The combination of these two emotions then gives rise to a sense of hopelessness. In some cases, the person may become suicidal, and in some cases, the person may become deeply depressed. The root of this mental state is the combination of extreme attachment and extreme anger. When we are already caught up in these emotions, applying the ultimate antidote of wisdom, realizing selflessness, is far beyond our abilities. The best method to handle such an experience, therefore, is to prevent it before it occurs. And the most extraordinary, supreme way we can choose to prevent it is to live in the joy of pure ethics. In fact, living in the joy of pure ethics is the best antidote for all of the gross delusions that arise in our minds. The mental sickness of depression can also arise from a deeply rooted sense of discontent, combined with the limitless desires and expectations for what life will bring us. Living in ethics can help us to liberate ourselves from unrealistic hopes and assumptions. It can enable us to appreciate our lives without being trapped by desire. So it's a pretty novel take on the causes of depression, isn't it? So coming from this extreme attachment and extreme anger. And a lot of that comes from these expectations of others. And of course, we expect so much of others, and it becomes unhinged when we don't apply it to ourselves first. When we don't try and embody it ourselves first. If we just tried to do it ourselves first, very quickly, we'd really feel for the struggles of others. We'd naturally respect them. So I wanted to do a little meditation, a reflection to help us develop equanimity. So, but just before we start the meditation, what's an area in your life where you recognize that you need equanimity, where you might be trying to develop equanimity now, or you may have already developed some equanimity, or you clearly see you need the equanimity and it's just not happening. So what kind of situations happening at the moment? Might be something like if you know you've got to be an inner professional but it's hard, or that you have a certain form of favoritism, like people that you treat as your favorites over others, or you might have a certain kind of prejudice. So for years and years, because I was a young person in the Joe Bielke, Peterson, Queensland, I had a big prejudice against the police because it was a police state and it was very corrupt. And I worked in those casinos that didn't exist. So, you know, I had a prejudice against the police, and it took me a long time to stop thinking inherently all police are bad. So, Bron, Donald Trump, yes, that's right. So Donald Trump is an excellent method to learn patience and to see below the appearance, to see below the behaviour. Yep, because if we can do it with Donald Trump, we can do it with anybody. Climate denialists as well, that's right, and white supremacists. So all of these extreme distorted views, extreme neglect of others, yeah. And like they say, there's nothing like a bigot to bring out the bigot. And I found that too when I lived in East Brunswick in Melbourne, and I thought I wasn't racist, but I tell you what, living in a really kind of fundamentalist suburb like that brought out the inner racist in me, and I was shocked. I was really shocked by my responses that I met bigotry with bigotry. And yeah, so how do we get below that? Let's do a little meditation. So we have our reflection, and let's set our motivation. We're going to do this meditation to set the groundwork, the support for our own inner peace and for a harmonious society. So how do we develop equanimity? Equanimity meaning not just a flatlining blandness towards others, but a real balanced attitude or approach toward all beings, not disturbed by fear or favour. If we can develop equanimity, then we'll be less likely to fight, to panic, to react possessively or inconsiderately. So let's first think about those that we love. So Bring to mind some people you feel really warmly towards, you love them, you admire them, you wish the very best for them. And that kind of warmth that you feel for them, I mean, it's there because you know and you understand their story. You care about what happens to them, regardless of your own welfare. It might be because they have really helped you and contributed to your life, and so you have that sense of wishing to repay their kindness. So have that feeling of warmth and love, and then try and expand it out to others by thinking about others, that if they too helped you or were kind, you would feel the same warmth towards them. If you understood their backstory, everybody has a story, you'd start feeling for them, caring for them, wishing them to be free of suffering, wishing that they were happy. If we just recognized the amount of effort that people put into each day to just being kind and patient, not creating trouble, we'd feel warmth towards them, kindness. So feel that warmth expanding in your heart towards others. Not just the ones that you love, but that feeling now expands to the others. And then for the strangers that we usually feel quite meh about, we kind of don't care or just neither way, don't even recognize that others are there. The strangers, the people that we don't know, we don't care about. They're not in our world, so they don't matter. So we can raise the bar and start caring about them. So what happened with coronavirus, that suddenly all of these people we didn't know, but we recognized they were just like us and they were suffering, locked up at home just like us, and we felt for them. If we're in traffic and we're at the lights, we can look at the person in front and on either side, and we can recognize, oh yeah, they too, they have a backstory. They have hopes and wishes, and they have fears and problems. So instead of just feeling meh about them, wishing them happiness, wishing them free of suffering, recognizing they're just like us. We are all in this together. And then the so-called enemies, the ones it's very difficult to see the suffering. We just see the harm, the destruction, the anger, the maliciousness, the danger. But behind that danger and that harm, there's suffering. So find the suffering. With brutalized animals like a guard dog, we can see the suffering. We can extrapolate out the suffering and the fear that drives their behavior. We can genuinely want to rehabilitate them instead of just destroy them, because we see the suffering, we recognize it's there. It might take a moment, but we can instinctually resonate with it. So with those people that we have prejudice towards, where's the suffering? What's underneath the face they put to the world? what drives their destructive behavior. And what we can find is that they have no control. They have no control of their minds or their circumstances. They have no control over their happiness or their unhappiness, no matter how much effort and control they try and put in. And just like under every guard dog, there is a scared puppy, under every really dangerous, destructive person, there was a scared, vulnerable 2-year-old, and something terrible went wrong. So I wish them happiness, everything that they need. Wish them free of their suffering. And then dedicate this reflection to being able to develop this sense of equanimity towards others. That's not our relationship towards others, not based on what they do for us, but based on our universal experience. That we all just want to be happy and none of us wants to suffer. And in this, we're all in it together. So as His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, we can dedicate, then we all suffer together, we all live together, may we all become enlightened together. So I hope you like that meditation, and it's a good one to come back to again and again, the friend, enemy, stranger meditation, and to kind of make it your own. We've got a couple of things that we can go through just for some kind of practical steps of the solutions, how to act with ethics. So one of the things that Yangtze Rinpoche was saying about the ethics, how come we don't practice ethics, or how come we don't have equanimity? And there's a couple of reasons. So one of them is that we just don't know. We haven't figured out what's right or wrong yet, and we haven't figured out what's destructive by nature and what's a rule. And if we haven't figured those out, you know, what's a universal experience and what's a cultural law, then it's very difficult to navigate your way through life and figure out what to do. So you can see people step over the line many times, and then the corruption and everything just flows on from that. And it's because we don't know how to sort out right from wrong. And we can't just have this blanket rule, because there isn't any inherent right or wrong. So that's one of them. The second reason how come it's difficult to practice ethics is that we just forget. We have a lack of conscientiousness. We're distracted. We end up doing stuff that we didn't even realize that we were doing. The third one is that we're oblivious, or we have kind of disrespect, we're neglectful of others. And the antidote to this is to try and develop some humility. And if we have humility, we're not going to disrespect them. If we have humility, it's like in Geshe-la Tampa's 8 verses, I'll always put myself the lowest of all and see others as dear and supreme. So this attitude of humility, of putting yourself under others, means you become incorruptible. So there is, in South America, there was a president there who gave most of his salary to the poor. He just drove this old bomb of a car, just lived in the same house that he lived in beforehand. Very low key, much loved. Never made it much into the news. I can't even remember his name. But he had that attitude. He put himself below the people. So then he automatically respected others, and he was incorruptible. So that humility becomes our ultimate safeguard. It just blows my mind that that's how to do it. Have some kind of respect and humility. And the other reason how come we forget to practice ethics is we're just overwhelmed by our disturbing emotions, by the delusions, and then we can't think straight. When we're overwhelmed by anger, we can't think straight. When we're overwhelmed by covetousness, craving our neighbour or whatever it is, we just can't think straight anymore. So like Yangtze Rinpoche said, we've got to kind of prevent it before it gets that bad. And practicing ethics actually is a prevention as well. So here's some just real handy hints to help us along the way. So when we're in company, watch your physical actions and speech. When you're out and about, and like in my case, when I'm out and about in Carindale, I have to look like a proper good person because they know I'm from the Buddhist Centre. And when something goes wrong, I can't just yell. One time when I took the cat to the vet, and the vet didn't listen to me, that I said the cat's half feral, and the vet paid no attention, lifted up the lid, and the cat escaped, just exploded out of the cage, and I had to catch the cat. And so I caught the cat, but because he was terrified, he just started biting me, and I could feel the tooth crunching down through the layers of muscle to my bone. I can still hear it and feel it, and I'm going, wow, that's going in really deep, and he's just going, hung, hung. Anyway, I'm holding the cat, and so finally the vet shut the door so he didn't run out onto the street and whatever, and there's blood everywhere, everything's tipped over. I had to go get a tetanus shot. By then I was crying uncontrollably, and all the time in my head was, I can't yell at these people and blow my top because I'm a Buddhist. So I just didn't make it worse. So I didn't yell at them, I didn't scream. I put the cat back in the box. I sat there and burst into tears. I had to go next door to the doctors. But I didn't bring Langri Tampasena into disrepute. I tell you what, though, it was all going through my head. But I at least didn't make the situation worse. Anyway, it looked like I'd been completely bashed up because all my arms swelled up from the infections and the tetanus shots and whatever. Anyway, so when in company, watch your physical actions and speech. Then try and cultivate friends with ethics. Instead of friends with benefits, friends with ethics. So hang around with people that have really good ethical conduct, and it'll rub off on you. So people that are careful with their speech, that try and use their discriminating wisdom when they're speaking so that they're accurate. They don't make wild generalizations. People that are naturally kind. Like I find when I'm spending time with Venerable Lasam, she's naturally kind. It just makes me think, oh my God, I'm so brutal. So it rubs off. It's good to be with people that are much more ethical than you. So it rubs off on you. It's so important. So friends with ethics, every good Buddhist needs one. Be active in civil society. So go out and vote. Use the power. It really makes a difference. Instead of, getting into hopelessness and helplessness. We've got to be part of the solution. If we're not part of the solution, we're part of the problem. Another way of putting this is, if from a position of privilege, so, yes, I'm a woman, so that's a lower status, but hey, I'm white, so that's a higher status. So I have privilege in that respect, and an Australian citizen, not a refugee, for instance. I have privilege in that respect. So from a position of privilege, silence means you're actually condoning all the bad behaviour. So from a position of privilege, we actually have to do something. Otherwise, we are part of the problem. So there's no way to stay neutral there. If we're neutral, from a position of power or privilege, we're actually part of the problem. So this is part of how to embody our ethics. We've got to put it into practice. And have that humility and respect for others, then we become a superhero. We become invincible. If we have that attitude towards others, then we'll never accidentally harm them, and we will be incorruptible. So, you know, that becomes the real cloak of our ethics, our vows. We may not feel like we can do much, but you put on your superpower cloak of your professional code of conduct, and off you go to work, and hey, you're embodying equanimity. So of course we can do it. We put on that cloak, we have the mantle of our vows, and that gives us power. It really is a superhero outfit. And then with our habits, so when we're in company, watch your physical actions and speech. And when you're alone, watch your mind. Or as Corey Jackson likes to say, practice good mental hygiene. Good mental hygiene. So careful what's going on in there, and what kind of inner dialogue we've got going, and what activities are we concentrating on? Covetousness or resentment, or are we concentrating on rejoicing for others, feeling incredible gratitude for all of the health workers? So that kind of good mental hygiene, we have to create a good internal environment. Proudly uphold your code of conduct. This is something to really practice pride about. Don't be bashful about it. Be proud of your professional code of conduct or your Buddhist code of conduct. And aware, we've got to use our concentration to bring it to mind all the time, to strengthen it, to become more familiar with that than our disturbing emotions. And every time that you do practice that inner professional equanimity, be proud about it. That's something good to be proud about. Becoming the inner professional. So even if we don't have an external code of conduct, professional code of conduct, all of us have to become an inner professional. Lama Zopa Rinpoche has asked us all to become an inner professional. And in fact, there's an app for that. So there's an app you can download, it's free, called the IJD, the Inner Job Description. And it's an app where you can track your ethics and how you're embodying them in your life. It's fantastic. So maybe that should be the homework. Download the app, the IJD app, Inner Job Description. Then with our habits as well, to try and avoid what I call spiritual materialism. So spiritual materialism is where we focus on ethics for kind of external worldly reasons. So for status, we want our friends to think well of us. We want to have a good reputation, or we want to please our parents, or we're kind of bargaining with karma or bargaining with God. All of that comes under that category of spiritual materialism. The motivation's totally off. So we've got to have that motivation of liberation from cyclic existence of all of our problems and their causes, so we can liberate others from their suffering and bring them to happiness. And that'll save us from the spiritual materialism. So I've found the spiritual materialism, we might start off with setting our motivation, but because our concentration isn't so good, it gets a bit wobbly. Our arms get a bit tired because we're not strong enough, and our motivation degenerates. It kind of just gets tarnished. And what might have started off being a very altruistic, full of good intentions, just ends up being about, no one's paying enough attention, or no one's thanked me. So this is a thing that often happens in Buddhist centres. People put in years and years and years of work, and then they get all in a tiff because no one thanked them. So that's when your motivation's degenerated, being tarnished by spiritual materialism. And it happens because our concentration isn't strong. So, you know, that's why all the 3 high trainings work together. And the last one, so remember, with our habits, we can develop a habit of happiness instead of a habit of misery, or a habit of anxiety. And a habit of happiness comes from when we have a sense of inner ease, where we're comfortable in our skin. So if we want that, if we want to be able to relax, if we want to be calm, if we want to be happy, it's got to come from ethics. There's no other way. If we're not comfortable in our own skin, it won't happen. You know, it's not something that we can get. It's a result, and the happiness is a result. It's a habit that we develop, an inner kind of momentum that comes from living ethically. So just before I kind of do the summary, are there any last questions or comments, anything else to add that you'd like to bring up, or any moral quandary? We might have a moment or two. I hope it made some sense for you. Can people redeem themselves? Yeah, always. I mean, look at me and Eddie. Hopefully we're on the way to redeeming ourselves. And really, the moment someone wants to change, they've begun. The moment someone genuinely wants to change, we can forgive them. What hurts is our perception that people mean to harm us, that they're doing it on purpose. And that, again, we need to apply our wisdom here, because that's just the appearance and it's wrong. Anyone who's acting destructively does it from unhappiness. There's no other way that it happens. It comes from unhappiness. So the moment that they actually start having good intentions and wanting to change, or recognizing the harm that they've done, is the moment that they start redeeming themselves. Yep, so it's always possible. And it's possible also because the nature of our mind is pure. All of those delusions, they're delusions. They're not us. They're distortions. So, yes, Philippa, when we look at the big wide world, it's in a constant catastrophe of cause and effect, cause and effect. Sometimes we're on the top and sometimes we're on the bottom. And how we treat people when we're on the top is how we're treated when we're on the bottom. Until that karma wears off, and then we get to the top, and then how we treat people on the top is how we're treated on the bottom. So it's a big cycle, and the Buddhist viewpoint is really large, to try and liberate those who are oppressed and the oppressors. The poor refugees and the rich Donald Trumps both need liberation. They're just on different parts of the cycle. And until we can see that, until we can get below and see that suffering, our mind will be unbalanced and unstable. So the wisdom comes in because it helps us reason it out and see below the surface. The concentration comes in because it helps us stick to it, so we come to the right conclusion. And so we're aware of our actions and we don't make things worse. And we remember to apply the teachings. And our ethics means we embody it. We actually live our values rather than just saying, I believe in them, and doing something totally else. And once we try and live it, put our ethics into practice, then that draws us closer to others, because we see how hard it is and how easy it is to be sidetracked. So these 3 higher trainings, they all work together. And if we have them all, then we can actually cut the root of suffering for ourselves, liberate our own minds, and then be able to help all others along the way. So the homework really for us as we go on through the rest of the week and the months and the years is to check up, as Lamieshi said, check up what's happening in the mind and check our motivation and adjust our motivation. Yeah, that's right. The person at work didn't wake up today planning to annoy you. That's right. And we didn't wake up planning to annoy them either. But we could wake up planning to help them. And if we have that motivation, it's going to flavor everything throughout the day. So what we can do with ethics is just have some times where you just regroup, you check. So it can be meal times. Every time you have a meal, then you reset your altruistic motivation and your equanimity and then your altruism. Or certain times throughout the day, morning, afternoon, evening. And then in the morning, set your motivation. Whatever I do today, I am not going to harm. I'm going to practice social distancing. And whenever possible, I'm going to try and help. So that's your motivation. And then you try and embody it. And at the end of the day, you go, what good things have I done today? And spend 2 minutes appreciating them. So they become strong. And anything that went wrong, that you did badly, then think, what's one thing I can do better? It's that simple. If you do that every day, eventually you will become enlightened. You wouldn't be able to help it. So thank you so much for all of your time, attention, and efforts. Let's dedicate all of this, that we can actually embody the 3 higher trainings, liberate ourselves and liberate others, and really embody it so that we can become embodied bodhisattvas for the benefit of all.